America at war, new fronts, new horrors. A huge explosion of some kind tonight in Kuwait. Also, Iraqi forces in Basra open fire on their own people as they run for freedom. U.S. Marines mistakenly kill a family of farmers, then lend a hand to bury them and wind up with thanks from the survivors. And after the war, a look at an ambitious proposal to build a whole new nation.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rabin. Tonight, continuing coverage of America at War.
Good evening. We have a full summary of the war for you tonight. We begin with a late-breaking development, an explosion in Kuwait. CBS News correspondent Mark Phillips is there, and he tells you what he knows and doesn't know about this blast so far. Mark?
Dan, after days of alerts and false alarms, the war did come to Kuwait this evening. A huge explosion rocked the entire center of Kuwait City, and it didn't go off terribly far from here. Just to the right of that illuminated building, you can see behind me, perhaps a mile and a half away, a large blast shook apart a shopping mall called the Shark Souk, which is Arabic for market. The damage to the interior of the shopping mall seemed to be reasonably extensive, but as this explosion took place at 10 to 2 in the morning here, luckily there were no shoppers around, and there do not appear to be, at this stage at least, any casualties. It's also unclear what caused this explosion. Early reports were that it was a missile. Later reports were that it was a bomb. The debris seemed to suggest it could have been either. A lucky escape for the Kuwaitis enough, but a large, large scare and a large, large bang. Dan?
Mark, it's been a pretty jittery day there in Kuwait. Any particular reason for that?
I don't know what the reason was, but it definitely was a day of heightened tensions here. There were roadblocks and checkpoints set up by Kuwaiti police all over the city. They may have had some intelligence. There's a great fear here of some sort of backlash from fundamentalist groups because of the Kuwaiti government's support for the U.S. and British war effort. There was very high tensions across the street. Hotels were closed down, bomb scares in several of the major downtown hotels here. It seems as if it has all come home for the Kuwaitis tonight.
Mark Phillips reporting live from Kuwait, where there has been a large explosion, cause and by whom unknown. Today's other major developments in the war with Iraq include a growing concern, denied by U.S. war planners at the high levels, that Iraqi ambushes on long U.S. supply lines could mean at least a somewhat longer and costlier war. The U.S. Army's top ground commander in Iraq said some of Saddam Hussein's forces are fighting harder than expected. That's what his men in the field had been telling him and he had observed. Everyone from the White House through the Defense Department down to his own commanding general, to say the least, didn't like it. President Bush came out later and said the U.S. will, and I quote, accept no outcome except complete victory. U.S. bombs and missiles again struck Baghdad hard as ground forces prepared to take on the Republican Guard defenders on the city's outskirts. Elsewhere, Iraqi agents were arrested for plotting terror attacks against U.S. interests. It hasn't been said where. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld accused Syria of helping Saddam Hussein. Now, for an overview of the war, in an effort to connect the dots, we offer you the big picture with CBS's David Martin at the Pentagon. David?
Dan, the Army's Apache helicopters have just completed a nighttime raid against the Republican Guards just 50 miles south of Baghdad. A CBS reporter with the unit says the Apaches hit 4 tanks, 6 armored personnel carriers, and 15 vehicles. 2 of the Apaches made hard landings when they returned to base, and there are reports of injuries but no deaths. Soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division boarded helicopters and moved into Iraq as American forces gathered themselves to do battle with Saddam's Republican Guards. For many of the troops, it's been a rough trip to the front, dodging bullets and going hungry. CBS News producer Chuck Stevenson is with the Marines.
We are now down to 1 ration a day. That's 1. I'm a big guy. I'm a hungry guy. I have a lot of energy, and I need more than 1 ration a day, and so do the Marines.
General William Wallace, the commander of Army forces, told reporters the enemy we're fighting is different from the one we'd war-gamed against. A candid admission the U.S. was surprised by the resistance it met in the South. Asked if it looks like the U.S. could be in for a longer war, he reportedly said, "It's beginning to look that way." The Army is now faced off against the Medina division of the Republican Guards at Karbala, and the lead elements of the Marines have reached Al-Qut, where another division is blocking the road to Baghdad. In Baghdad, where another strike lit up the night just a short time ago, the regime apparently thinks the main attack will come at Karbala. During the sandstorm, the Iraqis tried to reinforce Karbala with a column of tanks, but it was spotted on radar and a B-52 bombed the convoy. With Air Force and Navy jets flying 1,000 missions a day, the Republican Guards can neither reinforce nor counterattack. As this reconnaissance photo shows, they are seeking shelter in neighborhoods where the presence of civilians protects them from air attack. The Republican Guards may well be planning to do the same thing the Fedayeen fighters are doing in the South, fight from the cities. The timing of the ground assault against the Republican Guards depends on how much damage has been done to them by airstrikes. And tonight, officials say the bomb damage reports are still sketchy. Dan?
David Martin reporting live from the Pentagon. Iraqi paramilitary fighters, what the U.S. command now calls roving death squads, also threaten U.S. military convoys crossing the Euphrates River at Nasiriyah. U.S. Marines protecting those convoys have their hands full. Several more Marines have been killed, and 4 more were officially listed today as missing in action. And north of Nasiriyah, CBS's John Roberts reports other Marines mistakenly caused a family tragedy.
It was exactly the type of mistake the U.S. military most wants to avoid, but knows it cannot. A civilian vehicle carrying a family of farmers is attacked by Marines on a road north of Nasiriyah. 3 people, the family patriarch and 2 brothers, are killed. But amazingly, in their shock and grief, the surviving family members turned to the Marines for help.
He told us that it was the American military that did this, but they're not angry with us, and they understand because Saddam is sending civilians down this road intentionally for this to happen.
The victims are burned beyond recognition. The Americans bring body bags, load them onto the hood of a Humvee, and take them to the local village mosque. Marines know this sort of mistake could lose the battle for the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people. Military patrols on hair-trigger alert take care to ensure they are not targeting non-combatants. Humvees equipped with loudspeakers issue cautions to stay off the roads. But Iraqi military tactics mean Marines often don't know who they are shooting at.
They send civilian cars down, and those cars shoot at us. They open fire all the time, so we don't know who's the enemy and who isn't. So, you know, we see a car and it starts to act in a threatening way. It doesn't stop. We open up on it.
At the mosque, this young boy helps dig his grandfather's grave. The Marines, too, put their backs into the grim work.
It's very sad that we did this to this people or something like that. I don't know. It's not easy to dig someone else's grave.
And the Iraqis, who now freely express their disdain for Saddam, proclaim the victims martyrs and say they forgive the tragic error.
Thank you for giving us water, food, and medical care. Thank you for helping us bury these bodies and transport them back. Thank you for everything.
And the toll on civilians, the Marines say, will only get worse. Most of the casualties so far have been in sparsely populated rural areas. What lies ahead are major cities where the Marines say the Iraqi government has been collecting and hiding leaflets dropped by the U.S., telling civilians how to stay safe. John Roberts, CBS News, with the Marines north of Nasiriyah.
In the deep south of Iraq, British soldiers and Royal Marines surround Basra, but they do not yet control it. Iraq's second largest city is held by paramilitary fighters loyal to Saddam Hussein, and as CBS combat correspondent Lee Cowan now reports, civilians risk death if they try to escape.
They were, by all accounts, hostages in their own homes, who today made a break from Basra. But within a few hundred yards of freedom, their punishment came from the sky.
200 or 300 made a move across the bridge, and at that time they started being shelled by Iraqi forces.
Iraqi paramilitary forces firing on their own people. Members of Britain's 7th Armored Brigade shot back, wedging themselves between the Iraqis who were fleeing and the ones who were firing.
Sit down!
In the end, only a handful made it. The rest were forced to turn back. retreating into a city they seemed so desperate to leave. We're all suffering, this woman angrily screamed. Only God can help us now. Coalition troops are looking for help too. After surrounding the city for 5 long days, they're hoping for more supplies. But even that is proving difficult. It's crowds like this that make trying to resupply troops up north so dangerous. This is one of the first towns just across the border in Iraq, and already there's a crowd chanting pro-Saddam slogans. And with that many unfriendlies outside the walls of Basra, coalition troops can only guess how many might be inside, where so far only a few pinpoint bombs have gotten. Lee Cowan, CBS News, in southern Iraq.
In the mountainous north of Iraq, U.S. planes bombed Iraqi positions around the cities of Mosul and Kirkuk today and forced Iraqi troops loyal to Saddam to withdraw from hilltops overlooking the Kurdish city of Chamchamal. That's about 1,200 U.S. paratroopers of the Army's 173rd Airborne Brigade are now dug in at an airstrip in Kurdish-controlled territory. Helicopters and cargo planes are now operating from that base. Also today, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld accused Syria of sending prohibited military supplies, including night vision goggles, to Iraq. Rumsfeld said the U.S. will, and I now quote, hold the Syrian government accountable for such shipments. Syria denied the charge. It is Saturday morning now in Baghdad, and the city has been rocked again by extremely strong explosions. More bombs. More bombs apparently fell on Baghdad, some near the center of the city where government buildings are located, including the Information Ministry. Earlier, Iraq said a U.S. bombing today killed at least 58 people in a crowded Baghdad market. New York Times correspondent John Burns is in the Iraqi capital, and I asked him about those Iraqi claims.
It is widely assumed amongst the survivors that this was an impact from an American or a British aircraft. Whether it was or not, it is impossible for us to say. The victims included at least 10 or 15 children, grieving relatives standing over rough-cut wooden coffins. There is something of a panic, something verging on hysteria. People's passions are roused. There are many, many people in Iraq who wish to be free. Many of those people are terrified of this war. These quite terrible scenes, whoever was responsible for this was clearly a very large tragedy.
John Burns of the New York Times. In Iran, which fought its own long war with Iraq, hundreds of thousands turned out today to protest the current war, many with anti-U.S. posters in English. In Jordan, police clashed with pro-Saddam demonstrators in Amman, the capital. And in Gaza, large anti-U.S. protests today, despite President Bush's new calls for a Palestinian state. The U.S. State Department said today police in 2 unidentified foreign countries have arrested Iraqi intelligence agents who were plotting terrorist attacks on U.S. targets. A State Department spokesman described them as sleeper cells who were awaiting orders from Baghdad. He said one of the countries is in the Persian Gulf. A Turkish Airbus with more than 200 people on board was hijacked today on a domestic flight from Istanbul to Ankara and forced to fly to Greece. It landed safely at Athens Airport. A Greek official says the hijackers had explosives trapped to their body. I should say that it was singular. One hijacker had explosives strapped to his body. Islamic and leftist rebels have hijacked Turkish planes in the past. Who hijacked this one and the motive? Not known. Coming up next now on the CBS Evening News, this man's waiting to be called up for duty when the war is over. He's been recruited for the U.S. plan to help rebuild Iraq. With a humanitarian relief disaster building day after day, at least some Allied help finally arrived today in far southern Iraq. First, it took specially trained dolphins to help find mines the Iraqis planted. But then a big British supply ship reached the Gulf port of Qasr. It brought in tons of food and other supplies. Just about every day, the Pentagon talks about the plan, almost always a reference to the war plan. But there is another plan waiting in the wings for post-war Iraq. And as CBS's Wyatt Andrews reports tonight, it's an expensive and fairly detailed one.
Take a deep breath.
He's a family doctor out in the suburbs, but any moment now the phone could ring and Dr. Ali Al-Attar will leave for the job of his life.
And you're ready to go?
Any minute.
You are ready to leave your practice and go to Iraq?
That's a noble cause.
He will go to Iraq as part of the new Iraqi government being planned by the United States. The Pentagon has recruited about 100 so-called free Iraqis, all of them exiled professionals like Dr. Attar.
To help the Iraqis to rebuild their nation and help them establish a new form of government.
The recruitment of free Iraqis shows the level of detail and the sheer ambition of what the U.S. hopes to do the second the shooting stops. The U.S. not only wants to democratize Iraq, it hopes to rebuild the country. Reconstruction plans just in the first year call for the building of freshwater treatment plants, the upgrading of the electrical system, the repair of 6,000 Iraqi schools and 270 hospitals and clinics, and then this, universal health care for every Iraqi. That's 25 million people.
We're going to show them that it can happen. It can happen fairly quickly.
Andrew Natsios, the head of USAID, the foreign aid arm of the State Department, says the U.S. will reconstruct Iraq to make a statement.
What we are going to show the Iraqi people is that the American people care what happens to them after the war is over.
Universal health care for 25 million Iraqis.
Doable. Iraq is a country of a lot of intellectuals, a lot of willing people, a lot of capable people.
For starters, the U.S. plans to spend $2.4 billion to bring Iraq up from the ashes. It turns out President Bush has a sweeping domestic vision, and it's in Iraq. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Washington.
Coming up next here on the CBS Evening News, she's 19 years old and missing in action in Iraq. Her story is next. It's an indication of the new U.S. military. Of 21 American troops now listed as missing in action in Iraq, 2 are women who were in combat zones right along with the men. CBS's Jane Clayson has the story of one of them.
In the tiny hamlet of Palestine, West Virginia, Gregory Lynch is waiting for word of his daughter, Private First Class Jessica Lynch, who's been missing in action in Iraq since Sunday.
What's the worst part of it?
Not knowing where she's at, that she's missing. You know, it's kind of crushes you.
19-year-old Jessie Lynch is one of several soldiers who disappeared when their supply convoy was ambushed. Her parents first saw it on television.
And then it started flashing at the bottom screen, the unit number, and we knew it was her unit number then. About 11 o'clock, a state trooper and Army personnel come and gave us the news.
For an ambitious young girl from a tiny rural town, the Army offered the promise of travel, education, and a better future. Jessie explained it this way.
I can get an education and see the world too while I'm young, and then I'd have a career when I come out.
And Gregory Lynch and his family are certain that their daughter will return to become the school teacher she always wanted to be.
We're just going to keep a strong faith up that she's missing. She's out there laying low somewhere, waiting till our troops can catch up.
And when she walks down that driveway?
Yeah, she's going to get one big hug.
In the last Gulf War, POWs and MIAs weren't accounted for until hostilities ended. In this war, there's no telling when that may be. Jane Clayson, CBS News, Palestine, West Virginia.
We'll have more about the war when the CBS Evening News comes back in a moment. Facts on the ground indicate that by any objective analysis, in many important ways militarily, the war goes well, but not in all ways, and there are legitimate concerns. Not long ago, the question was, when will the war begin? Now, just 10 days into it, the question is, when will the war end? To which the President now responds, when it is won. No people in history have ever seen a war the way we are seeing this one. Real-time coverage, up close on the battlefield, live on television, 24 hours a day. As Americans watch, polls show 3 out of 4 say they support the war. But gone are hopes that it will be over in a matter of days or even weeks. 2 out of 3 Americans now tell pollsters they believe the war will go on many months. The battle for Baghdad itself hasn't even started. The Defense Secretary now says we are closer to the beginning of this war than to the end. Reality, much of it harsh, is setting in about this ultimate in reality television. And that's part of our world tonight. As we pass off now to CBS Sports, be assured we'll have frequent updates on the war for you during college basketball, and if anything important happens, we'll break right in. Dan Rather reporting for the CBS Evening News. I'll see you again soon.
For news 24 hours a day, log on to cbsnews.com.
This is CBS.